We are officially in NFL Draft Month, which is one of the most exciting months of the year for most of the NFL fan bases. LA Rams, you guys kind of do your own thing. But within Draft Month, over 250 young men's dreams become reality as they become NFL players. And within the draft process, there are thousands of hours poured into research, watching film, and planning of how to attack the draft for each and every NFL team. The goal, of course, for all 32 teams is the same: hoist the Lombardi Trophy with the players selected in this year's draft. And in today's video, we are going to discuss what each team drafting in the top 5 should do with their first round picks, or in Houston and Seattle's case, the first of their first round picks. And do you remember when going on a road trip meant printing out maps in advance? Well, now we have maps on our phone, and it's similar with Morgan & Morgan. Submitting an injury claim is easy, and you don't have to leave your couch. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm and have over 100 offices nationwide with over 800 lawyers. They have recovered over $15 billion for clients and have a proven track record of fighting to get you both full and fair compensation. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. It takes 8 clicks or less to submit a claim, and you can have America's largest injury law firm fighting for you. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Garrett, and now we dive into what each team drafting in the top 5 should do with their first round pick. The Carolina Panthers are on the clock, and this one is obvious. You don't trade 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a receiver who will be just 26 years old at the start of the 2023 season to go up to number 1 overall and not draft a quarterback. Over the past few years, they've had several quarterbacks start games for them, like Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, PJ Walker, Cam Newton, and Teddy Bridgewater, and they've come to a realization that enough is enough. We couldn't win with any of these veterans, and instead of relying on 2022 third-round pick Matt Corral, who is coming off of a season-ending Liz Frank injury, they decided to go get their franchise quarterback. Personally, I would choose Bryce Young with the number 1 overall pick, but it's looking like they are going to choose CJ Stroud from Ohio State, but the decision is the same regardless of which quarterback it is, and we all know they are going to select a quarterback. And sure, the supporting cast isn't going to be what Joe Burrow has in Cincinnati, but having Miles Sanders, DJ Chark, Adam Thielen, Hayden Hurst, and Ike Ekwonu to protect the quarterback's blindside certainly isn't bad for a rookie. Meaning it's not going to ruin them, similar to how Urban and the gang almost ruined Trevor while he was throwing to Laquan Treadwell as his wide receiver 3 in 2021. The biggest thing to remember for Carolina is this isn't going to be a 1-year turnaround. But for the Panthers, a team that's had a hodgepodge of quarterbacks over the past few years, they need to nail this, and I think it will be CJ Stroud. The Houston Texans, like the Carolina Panthers, have an easy decision, and I think it's even easier for them as it's draft whichever of the top 2 quarterbacks Carolina doesn't take. The Texans did a very Texans thing and won the Week 18 game of the 2022 season over the Indianapolis Colts, which caused them to slide from the number 1 overall pick to the number 2 overall pick, and ultimately cost them the choice of their quarterback of the future. I love everything they've done this offseason though, and it started with the hiring of head coach DeMeco Ryans. They've done a good job in free agency of bringing in talent, as aside from a few positions, this roster obviously wasn't great, and there's a reason they finished 30th in points per game in 2022 and 27th in points allowed per game. And assuming CJ goes number 1 to Carolina, Bryce won't be walking into a bad situation, or at least as bad of a situation as one might think, relative to how the 2022 Texans looked. In free agency, they added Robert Woods at receiver and Dalton Schultz at tight end, and also brought in Devin Singletary from Buffalo and Noah Brown from the Cowboys. Are any of these guys top 3 or 4 at their position? No, and I'm not claiming they are, but it was key to address the offense and to ensure that whichever quarterback they select with a top 2 pick comes in and has a favorable situation from the start. Not to mention, they also have Dameon Pierce in his second season, and as a player who nearly went for over 1,000 yards rushing as a rookie, despite playing in 13 games. The Houston Texans, in a lot of ways, as crazy as this may sound, despite everything that's happened to them over the past few years, are doing everything right. and they need to draft their franchise signal caller with the number 2 overall pick. For anybody wondering, at pick 12, it's going to depend in a lot of ways how the board plays out, but I would never be against taking another weapon to help out your new quarterback, especially in a conference where if you want to eventually compete, and I mean seriously compete, you're going to have to be able to hang with the Mahomes, Burrows, and Allens of the world, and even Trevor Lawrence to just win your division. So a little bonus for the Texans as we glanced at their number 12 overall pick too, but with the number 2 pick, take whoever is remaining between CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. Next up is the Arizona Cardinals, and this is one where there are 2 options. And full disclosure, out of any team picking in the top 5, Arizona to me at least is the most fun to talk about and project because of the endless possibilities. And Cardinals fans, you guys unfortunately know this, but 2023 is going to be a punt year. Kyler tore his ACL late in the 2022 season, and even if he didn't, this roster is not talented, and even with a healthy Kyler Murray, I don't think they would get over 6 wins, especially in the NFC West of all divisions. The Cardinals desperately need to trade back and need to acquire more picks. If there is a Madden simulation or rebuild team in this year's upcoming Madden game, the Cardinals are the team to rebuild because they have so many holes on the roster. And even if they add a Will Anderson to the team with the 3rd overall pick, it's kind of like, okay, great. How are we going to address the next hole on the defense? And full transparency, in the absolute worst case for Arizona, Will Anderson should become a Cardinal. But what I think would be a home run for them is they trade back to 7 and have the Raiders come up in front of Indy and they draft either Anthony Richardson or Will Levis. And it doesn't have to be Las Vegas either, as it can be any team. And I don't think Arizona should make this pick because of the lack of talent on the roster. Their number 1 priority entering the 2023 draft should be to acquire an extra first-round pick for next year. That's it. That's the goal for them. But again, if nobody wants to come up in front of Indy, or everyone knows Arizona wants out of the pick and they try and lowball them and only want to give them a future second-round pick, Arizona should not give in to any team's demands because, again, in the worst-case scenario, they are bringing Will Anderson to the desert. But the number 1 goal for Arizona and what they should do in this draft is to acquire an extra first for next year. And honestly, they are so depleted of talent at the moment that if they trade back to 7 and someone else wants to come up, I would not be opposed to trading back again if they can acquire more picks in the future, because that's what this team needs. 2023 is going to be a bad year for them, but they control 2024 and beyond, and it starts by trading the number 3 overall pick on draft night. Next up is the Indianapolis Colts, and there is a lot more to discuss with them than there is the first 3 teams, and the Seahawks too for that matter at 5, and it's due to what could happen with Arizona at number 3. In the best case scenario for Indy, Arizona stays and drafts Will Anderson. I like Tyree Wilson as a prospect, the edge from Texas Tech, quite a bit, but I don't think Indy can afford to take him. They are similar to Carolina of the AFC from a quarterback perspective, as they too have had a hodgepodge of quarterbacks play for them over the past few years. Obviously, Andrew Luck retiring unexpectedly hurt this franchise in a big way and completely rocked their world, as it would any team, but we are going on the 4th offseason without him and still do not have a successor to Andrew. Over the past 3 years, they've started Matt Ryan, Sam Ehlinger, Nick Foles, Carson Wentz, and Phillip Rivers as their quarterbacks to try and replace Andrew. And in 2019, they started Jacoby Brissett and Brian Hoyer, but I don't really fault Indy for the 2019 season, as Andrew retired in August, and there simply wasn't anything they could do with that short of a time period to get ready for the upcoming season. So we are really focusing on everybody but Brissett and Hoyer, and going from 2020 and beyond. And in those 3 seasons, Indy has accumulated a grand total of 0 playoff wins, and while I will always say and vouch that the 2020 Colts team was underrated, that does not change the results from their season. And Chris Ballard is entering a period as the GM where it is truly now or never, and they are the definition of a sitting duck at number 4 overall, because everyone in the world knows they need a quarterback in the worst way, and a long-term quarterback at that. So their draft to a degree relies on what Arizona does at 3, because if a team does not trade up, then they will presumably have their choice between Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. But if someone does, then they get the last of the 4 quarterbacks, which to me at least is a very scary situation. Because what if you don't like that guy as much as you like the other 3? Or what if you were banking on the Cardinals taking Will Anderson and that messes up your entire draft? The Colts certainly aren't in no man's land, as general manager Chris Ballard could easily call the Cardinals GM, Monty Ozenfort, and basically say, hey Monty, let's cut to the chase and realistically talk about what it's going to move up 1 spot. And if in the scenario Richardson is taken at 3, I don't love Will Levis, and if I were Chris Ballard, there is no way I would feel comfortable coming home to my family and saying, hey guys, our lives and what we have here in Indiana rely on Will Levis and whether or not we live here for the next 5 years, or have to move because I got fired by the end of next January. Because drafting a quarterback in the first round isn't just a franchise-altering decision, good or bad. It can be a life-altering decision for the front office and coaching staff on whether they boom as a draft pick or, unfortunately, bust as a draft pick. And if Ballard drafts Levis, this could result in him getting fired, which, by the way, also applies if he drafts Richardson and if he whiffs in the NFL as well. But the Colts, to me at least, should bite the bullet and have that conversation with Arizona and ask what it would realistically take to move up 1 spot, because they are a sitting duck at number 4 overall. And Chris Ballard, for the sake of his job, cannot afford to miss on whichever quarterback he selects. Seattle at 5 is very interesting for a few reasons, because it's not as simple as pass rusher and that's it. I heard this on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, but the concept was Seattle was gifted this top 5 pick because of how bad Denver was in 2022. And basically the concept was, how often are you going to be in a position in the Pete Carroll era, who, by the way, is 71 years old, are you going to have the chance to draft a quarterback not just in the first round, but in the top 5? And the concept was to move up to 3, where Arizona is currently selecting, and draft Anthony Richardson and let him develop behind Geno Smith for a full season. And Seattle has the draft capital. And I love the idea of this because Geno can basically tell him everything that went wrong for him early on and how he found success at 32 years old in Seattle. That would of course throw a wrench in Indy's game plan and essentially force them into drafting Will Levis at 4. But in the other scenario, Seattle could stay put and, at worst, take Tyree Wilson, which is a hilarious at-worst scenario because of how good of a prospect he is. I think it will come down to Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson for them, and I think the best-case scenario for Seattle is to have 4 quarterbacks go in the top 4. They finished top 10 in scoring last year as they finished 9th in points per game, but finished 25th in points allowed per game. And like we preach so often on the channel, and if you're new to the channel, this is something we talk about all the time, the key to getting to the postseason is to win your division. And in the most recent game for Seattle, they didn't just lose to the 49ers in the playoffs, as they were manhandled, as they gave up over 500 yards of offense, they allowed over 180 yards rushing, and the 49ers held the ball for nearly 33 minutes of the game. And oh yeah, they also put up 41 points. This was all done with Brock Purdy as their quarterback, who by no means is a top 3 or 5 quarterback in the NFL. Meaning, the 49ers roster is insanely talented, and Seattle has to figure out a way to not only compete with San Francisco, but figure out a way to beat San Francisco. And a player like Tyree Wilson, who is 6'6", 275 pounds, can come in and immediately contribute for this team and get them closer to achieving this goal. Will they beat them, of course, is something else, but at least it will be a step in the right direction. And like we did with Houston, for Seattle's second first-round pick, which is their own first-round pick at number 20 overall, I think they should take the best receiver available, and a caveat here, that's not Quentin Johnston. This would be under the assumption any of Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, or Jackson Smith-Njigba is available, because Tyler Lockett is getting up there in age. And whether or not Geno Smith is the long-term guy, the next quarterback, or even Geno if he plays in Seattle for the next few years, will need help. And DK Metcalf alone cannot be responsible for an entire receiving core. For Seattle, it's either Tyree Wilson or trade up and get Anthony Richardson. And that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world and help tremendously with the YouTube algorithm. Until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.